Hey everybody, welcome again to Impact Church. One of the things that I am constantly trying to work on and trying to improve and get better at as a pastor is some of my leadership skills. Not only just because I'm a lead pastor, but just for any situation that I might find myself being in a leadership role. Because here's what I really believe. Everyone is a leader in some sort of capacity. I really believe that. Here's why. Whether it's at your job, you're at church, in your home, in your friend group, whenever you have influence, you're a leader. That's what I believe. I believe leadership is simply influence. So if you have influence in some kind of situation, then you are a leader in that situation. You might not have a title, but you are still a leader. So I understand that. So I'm constantly trying to work on my leadership skills. I listen to different leadership podcasts. I will read different books about leadership. I know things like Strength Finders and Enneagram and those kind of leadership skills, temperaments that help me with that. But the thing that has helped me the most when it comes to my leadership and growing in my leadership, the thing that's helped me more than anything else is failure. Every time I've messed up, that's what's really helped me grow in leadership. Because I've started to learn some of the things that I don't do as well and I need to work on and get better at. Here's some things that I've learned. I am a type of personality that I like to take something and make it the best possible version of that thing. I'm a maximizer is what Strength Finders would call it. Like to take something like, how can this be the best possible thing? Because I have some of that stuff, I can find myself being a little too controlling, where I want to make sure things are done the right way, which always happens to be my way. So I will do, and at times I've done it in the back. I haven't done it as much. You guys can tell me if I'm wrong. But there have been times when they would be running slides and doing sound, and I would just stand there like this and watch them do it. And if they were a little late, I'd be like, hey, you're late on that. And at times, the sound people have to go, dude, get out of here. Like, go stand up front. You need to be a little less controlling. Like, okay, you're right. I need to do that. So because I know that, though, because I know that's something I mess up on, sometimes I'm also too not controlling. I do that, too. One time, when I was a student pastor, at the last church I was at, I was moving from being a student pastor to being the family pastor, so we had somebody else that was going to be the student pastor. And so I knew that some people would call me controlling a little bit, so I was like, you know what, I'm not going to be that. I'm not going to micromanage. I'm not going to be nitpicky. I'm going to just let him do his thing. So I kind of showed him how to do it and said, all right, hey, you got the reins. It's your responsibility now. You're now the leader of this. You do it the way you want to do it. I was trying to be like, hey, I don't want to tell you what to do. You just do it how you want to do it. But the problem was I was so hands-off that he was like, he doesn't even care about me. Like, he just let me out to dry, and he eventually met with me. He was like, hey, are you still, like, in this? Like, what's going on? I was like, oh, sorry, I was trying not to. So at times I can be on both ends of the spectrum. At times I'm impatient. You can ask staff. There are times, it happens a lot, on Friday, I will text Frank like, hey, I got an idea on how we're going to close. Frank, I need you to play this song. He's like, well, we've had the songs out for a week. I know, but I need you to play this song. Lauren, I need you to make this for me. And then, Rob, can you make this slide? And he's like, it's Friday, dude. The service is in 2 days. We're not doing that. So there are times I'm impatient because if I want something, I want it now. The times I messed up the most in leadership have taught me where I am still growing. That's what it's taught me. The areas that I'm still trying to get better at, I'm still working on how I can become a better leader. And there's a verse that I read often. It's actually in my office. When it comes to leadership, it's really helped me. And here's the verse, Philippians chapter 2, verse 3 through 4. I think it's one of the best verses in the Bible when it comes to leadership. It says this: do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself, not looking to your own interest, but each of you to the interest of the others. The times that I have fallen short, I have found that I haven't done this, that I operated with selfish ambition, that I didn't operate with humility, that I looked at my own interests first. I didn't look at the interests of other people. That's what I found for me. So throughout this series, we're going to be looking in the Bible for examples of bad leaders. And what I've been learning as I've been doing this is there are so many examples to pick from. There are so many different options that we can have when it comes to bad leaders. We're going to be looking at broken leaders in the Bible. We're going to look at the moments that they failed and how they failed. We're going to be looking at that and what we can learn from those mistakes. Today, we're going to be looking in 1 Samuel. So if you have your Bibles, you're going to open up to 1 Samuel. We're going to be looking at the first king of Israel. So some background before we really get into this. Israel, the nation of God, that's the God's chosen people. they operated differently than everybody else, and here's how. Every nation back then had a king. That king ran everything. He was the main person. He was in charge. The only nation that didn't was the nation of Israel. The reason why they did not have a king is because God was their king. So they're like, we're not going to have a king. We're going to be different than every other nation. We're not going to have a king. Instead, they had what they called judges, and judges were kind of leaders. They would oversee things. They're also prophets. They would prophesy to people. That's what they would do. But they did not have a king. So they were very different from everybody else. One of those judges is a guy named Samuel, who we will be learning about a little bit today. Samuel was also a prophet, so he would talk for God. He would talk to God. And one day, the Israelites come up to Samuel, and they say, hey, Sammy, listen, this whole no king thing, we're done with it. We want to have a king now. Every nation has a king. We don't have a king. We don't want judges anymore. We want a king. And Samuel, being a judge, takes it personally. He's like, oh, they don't want me. This is an attack on me. They don't like me. And God gives a response that I heard a lot when I was in the dating game in high school and college. Some of you heard it too. Here's the response God gives to Samuel. He says, listen, Samuel, it's not you, it's me, okay? It's not, you're great, you're awesome, you're wonderful, it's me. And it was true. They would say, no, they aren't saying that because they don't like you. They're saying they want a king because they don't want me to be the king anymore. So tell Samuel to tell them, hey, listen, you can have a king, but you're not going to like it. Listen, if you desperately want a king, you can have it, but I am telling you, it's going to be worse for you if you have it. I highly recommend you don't do it. You have a choice. If you want a king and you say, yes, we still want a king anyways, we'll give you a king. You're going to regret it, but I'm telling you, you can have it. You're not going to want it. If you're a parent in the room, you understand this because I've done this many times. Here's what my kids love to do. My youngest, Noah, is a boy, and he loves superheroes. That's all he wants to do is play superheroes. And every once in a while, they will play together, myself, my son, and my two girls who are older. They will play superheroes, and the way they do that is they dress up in superhero costumes, and they fight bad guys. That's what they do, okay? But the problem is, Noah is always Hawk. You know what Hawk does? He smashes. So at times, Hawk will smash some of the other superheroes because he's going to smash. You can't stop Hawk from smashing. So they're about to play, and I always go down like, girls, Brooklyn, Savannah, I highly recommend you don't play this game because Noah's 3. He doesn't understand. He's going to smash. I don't want him to smash. He's going to hurt you. It's going to end with you crying. I know it. I've seen it a million times. And sometimes I'll go, no, Dad, I promise we're not going to get hurt. I promise it's going to be a lot of fun. Dad, please, I really want to do it, please. And so after all, I'll be like, I'm telling you, you shouldn't do it. Like, no, I want to. He's like, all right. As the good dad I am, like, all right, go ahead. Have fun. 10 minutes later, they come up. Noah hit me. It was like, he's smashing. What do you want me to do about it? Told you it's going to happen. That's what's happening here. And guess what? This still happens with us. You see, we have freedom. We have free will to choose how we act. God makes it clear on how we should act, but sometimes we just insist and go, no, God, I understand what you're saying. I don't want to do it that way. I'm not going to do it that way. And then when it turns out to be worse for us and we suffer because of the decision that we made, and we look at God and go, see, God, why didn't you do anything about it? And I imagine God's thinking the same thing I was thinking, like, well, I told you not to do that. Why would you go down that path? Now, I want to make something very clear. Just because bad things happen to you does not mean it's a result of sin. We don't believe in a God of karma, okay? If we did, we'd all be in trouble. We do not believe in that. But there are times where God will say, hey, this is the path you should go down because it's the best for you. Sin is what's worse for us and people around us. You should go down this path. And we go, yeah, I don't want to do it. I'm going to go down this way. And then we get mad when bad things happen. There's pain that sometimes we can avoid if we follow God's direction. Just because we have that pain doesn't mean we can't be recovered from that pain. I want to make that clear. And just because you have it doesn't mean you did something wrong necessarily. This world is broken. There's sin in this world everywhere. But God wants to protect us. And right here in the nation of Israel, he's saying, hey, you don't want a king. Trust me, you don't want a king. The Israelites say, yes, we do. We really want a king. God says, okay, I'll give you a king. If you want a king, I'm going to give it to you. So Samuel goes out to find the first king. And God tells Samuel, hey, go to this time, around this time in the land of Benjamin, you're going to see someone. And this person shows up, and this person is a very handsome and tall man, is how Samuel records it. And his name is Saul, King Saul. So from King Saul, we see a reign of a king that is not a good king. In fact, Scripture says he was an evil king. He was a bad king. But here's something I want you to catch, and I want to make sure you understand this. Saul was anointed. Saul was called by God to be king. He was called. So I want to make something very clear to you. Just because you are called by God to do something doesn't mean you are exempt from failure. We've seen this, haven't we? If you've been around church world, you don't understand church world, and you see some celebrity pastors that have been in a position that they were doing great things, and all of a sudden, because of a failure, they had to step down. People like Perry Noble, James McDonald, Bill Hybels, Mark Driscoll, or Carl Lentz. People that possibly were called by God to lead a church that helped and saved people, but yet failed. When we look at the broken leader that Saul was, there are many leadership lessons that we can learn. So I'm going to talk about 4 things that we can learn when it comes to Saul. Bad examples that Saul gave. The first one is this: convenient obedience. Convenient obedience. Saul at this point has become king. Samuel continually speaks for God to Saul, and Samuel gives clear instructions to Saul on what he is supposed to do next as king. And here's what it says in 1 Samuel chapter 15, starting in verse 2. This is what the Lord Almighty says: I will punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they waylaid them as they came up from Egypt. Now go, attack the Amalekites and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Very clear instruction. Go to them, destroy everything. Everything is gone. Everything is done. Do not leave anything or anyone there. So what does Saul do? It's very clear instructions. Go and destroy it all. Here's how Saul responds in verse 9. But Saul and the army spared Agag and the best of the sheep and cattle, the fat calves and lambs, everything that was good. These they were unwilling to destroy completely, but everything that was despised and weak, they totally destroyed. You know what Saul may be thinking? Maybe thinking this, like, you know what? These are perfectly fine cattle and lambs, and like, why? It's a waste if we were to destroy all this stuff. So why don't we just, I don't know, let's just take it back with us. I know God said to totally destroy everything, but we're just going to take it back with us, and we're going to feed the poor with it, or we're going to have a feast. We're not going to waste God. We're going to sacrifice it to God. It's a good thing. So that's what we're going to do. I know what God said, but here's what we're going to do instead. You know what he's doing? He is choosing what commands to obey and what commands he doesn't need to obey. Now, see, this works for me, but this part of it doesn't. I know better. Saul is deciding what is worth following and what isn't. And because of this decision, God decides, you know what? I'm going to find Saul's replacement. Because of that decision. As followers of Jesus, we are called to obedience because we trust that God knows better. We trust that God knows better and that God has our best interests at heart. So if he commands us to live a certain way or to follow a certain path, we need to get to a point where our faith says we can trust him that when things don't make sense, when things are harder because of it, when we don't fully understand it, we say, you know what, if you said it, I'm going to have faith that even when I don't understand it, that I should still do it. That's why as godly leaders, this is what we're called to do. Godly leaders consistently obey. We consistently obey. Jesus talked directly to this when, if you know the story, there's a woman caught in the act of adultery, and they take her and they throw her in front of Jesus' feet. And they say, well, the law says you're supposed to stone her for that sin. What are you going to do about it? And Jesus says, let ye who has not sinned throw the first stone. And he starts doodling in the sand. Scholars believe that he's probably writing down the sins of everybody else. We don't know that, but it would make sense. And one by one, all these people, including all these religious leaders, started to step back and go, oh, I can't throw a first stone. See, it's easy to say, hey, kill this girl that committed adultery when you're a person that doesn't commit adultery. But then when he starts saying, yeah, but if you've also done this, you're also a sinner, and then they start slowly backing up. If you're like me, it's really easy for me to point out certain people's sins and say, hey, they should not do that. And those sins always conveniently are things that I don't struggle with. But then when it comes to certain sins that I do struggle with, I find myself having a lot more grace for people. It's weird how that works, right? No, we are called as godly leaders to consistently obey. You may be a hard worker, which you should be. You should be a hard worker. God calls us to be a hard worker. He calls us not to be lazy, but to work hard. You can be maybe a hard worker, which is great, while at the same time forsaking your family at home. We need to consistently obey. You may be generous with your time, which you should be, but you're not generous with your finances. Or you may be generous with your finances, and you're not generous with your time. We as godly leaders need to consistently obey. We might give our friends the benefit of the doubt that we don't give our family, or give our family the benefit of the doubt that we don't give our friends. godly leaders consistently obey? Do you strive to be all that God has called you to be, giving every aspect of our heart to obedience, or just what's easiest to do? That's what Saul did. Number two, what's another way that Saul, being a broken leader, showed us some failure that we can learn from? Number two, resentful disagreements. After Saul disobeyed God, Samuel finds this little shepherd boy named David. You probably know about David. The story of David and Goliath. We're actually going to talk about David next week. There's a lot of things we can learn from David as well. So David becomes anointed to be the next king after Saul. Saul knows this. He's like, oh, that's my competition. He's the person taking over my job. And all of a sudden, you can start to see Saul's jealousy, his insecurity coming out because he knows that David is the next person. So Saul becomes completely paranoid about David and decides, I'm going to try to kill David, and anyone that associates with David is also dead. Because he had the mindset that we see a lot with some people, is that if you're not with me, you're against me. So if you're with David, you aren't with me, and you are now my enemy. We see an example of this in 1 Samuel chapter 22. He learns about Ahimelech, who is a priest, and he learns what he does, and here's what he says. Saul said to him, why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, giving him bread and a sword and inquiring of God for him, so that he has rebelled against me and lies in wait for me as he does today? Everything Saul is accusing Ahimelech of, who's a priest, everything he's accusing him of is perfectly fine. He's allowed to do it all. He's a priest. He's a priest of Saul. He's also a priest of David. That'd be like if I got mad at any of you, if you had a problem, you didn't come to me, you went to another pastor. You're obviously allowed to do that, and another pastor is allowed to talk with you, right? I'm allowed to talk to people that are not part of this church. Like, that's what he's getting mad at Ahimelech for doing. And look how he responds. Ahimelech responds in verse 14. Who of all your servants is as loyal as David, the king's son-in-law, captain of your bodyguard, and highly respected in your household? Was that day the first time I inquired of God for him? Of course not. Let not the king accuse your servants or any of his father's family, for your servant knows nothing at all about this whole affair. Here's what he's saying. I've done nothing wrong, and you have no clue what you're talking about. That's what he says. Listen, what I've done nothing wrong, and you have no idea what you're talking about. Look how Saul responds in verse 16. You will surely die, Ahimelech, you and your whole family. You're not with me, you're against me. No, if you're with him, no, that's not happening. Resentful disagreement. Anyone that wasn't with him was all of a sudden the enemy. Some of us have what I call self-preserving pride. You know what that is? You do whatever it takes to ensure that you, your way, your thinking comes out on top. I want to make sure I'm always right. The way I think is the way it should be. I don't want to hear about how I did anything wrong. I don't want to hear from anybody else that disagrees with me. I don't want to hear any of that. If you aren't with me, you're against me. You know where this comes from? If you struggle with this, like I have in the past, this comes from this resentment that anyone disagrees with you, comes from insecurity. It's an insecurity that we have. When you aren't fully convinced in who you are and what God has called you to do and who God has called you to be, you'll be tempted to allow disagreements or any criticism as a threat to you and as a threat to your success. That's why as godly leaders, that's not what we do. Godly leaders instead embrace feedback. That's what godly leaders do. Embrace feedback. Here's something that you need to hear. You ready? You might need to write this down. You are not always right. Look at me, the people that aren't looking at me. You are not always right. Now, all the people that when I said that, you thought of your spouse instead of you, I want you to look at me. You are not always right. You're not. We know that. We understand that, but yet sometimes we still get this wrong. But you will get things wrong. You will see things through your limited perspective. And if you do not have enough people around you who are willing to speak up and give you feedback when you need it, even when it goes against you or when it goes against what you think or the best way you think things should be handled, you will limit your leadership potential. When we first started Impact 3 years ago, I had a hard time when it came to criticism, especially if I would, and I don't even do this anymore because I know I'm still working on this. A lot of times after the sermon, I would go up to my wife, Erica, and be like, hey, how do you think the sermon went today? And she will be honest. If it was good, she would tell me. If there's things she didn't think was that great, she would let me know. And immediately I would go, well, you don't know what you're talking about when it comes to the bad stuff. Good stuff, you got it. That's what I used to do. I said, I don't want I only want feedback if it's telling me I'm great. If it's not, then I don't want to hear it, Erica. No, but I've learned over time, because here's what I've really learned over time, and I'll just be honest with you. When we first started, I was trying to hit a home run every time I preached. Now I'm just trying to get on base. You know what I mean? If I got a bunt to get on base, then that's fine. I'm not trying to home run every time. Feedback, we should embrace feedback. Feedback shouldn't be something that you just endure, that you're just willing. You need to embrace it. This is a chance for you to get better at what you are doing. The reason why some of us hate feedback and we resent anyone that disagrees with us is because we have trouble separating the do from the who. When Erica gives me feedback on my sermon, she isn't saying, hey, you're a bad pastor and a bad preacher. She's just saying, hey, the thing you did, here's a way to improve it and make it a little better. Separate the do from the who. We as godly leaders need to embrace feedback as a chance for you to get better, because you understand that you aren't the perfect leader that you're called to be. You never will be. You're constantly growing. So feedback will help you get better. How else did Saul fail being a broken leader? Number 3, he used deflective-blame. Deflective-blame. So Saul, going back to our first story, Saul carried out the Lord's instructions, but he didn't carry it out fully 100%. He went and attacked like he was supposed to, but he didn't destroy everything and kill everything. He brought some of it home. He brought some of those people home, and he does it, and he goes up to Samuel and goes, hey, we did it. Great job, everybody. Go team. High five. Samuel says, here's the problem. Where all those sheep come from? Like the cattle and like all those things, like they weren't here before. Where did they come from? And look how Saul immediately deflects it away from him. It says this in chapter 15, verse 15. Saul answered, the soldiers brought them from the Amalekites. They spared the best of the sheep and the cattle, sacrificed to the Lord your God, but we totally destroyed the rest. I gave the command that God told me, go and destroy everything. And these soldiers just came and they brought this stuff back. But we destroy everything else, and we're going to sacrifice it to God. So we're doing a great thing with it, so don't worry about it. But Samuel doesn't buy it, because the night before he actually had a dream that God spoke to him about and said, hey, Saul did not do exactly what he's supposed to do. So Samuel knows. And so Samuel says, no, God told me that you didn't do everything. And Saul doubles down on it. Here's what he says in verse 20. But I did obey the Lord. I went on the mission the Lord assigned me. I completely destroyed the Amalekites and brought back Agag, their king. The soldiers took sheep and cattle from the plunder, the best of what was devoted to God, in order to sacrifice them to the Lord your God at Gilgal. That's what he does. He says, no, it's not me. It's not my responsibility. And he deflects it to somebody else. If you've been here, you know this, but I'm a huge Ravens fan, and I am a big Lamar Jackson fan. He's only changing the game of football in front of our eyes. Get on the bus, or you're going to run over by it, okay? But here's what I love the most about Lamar Jackson, and this is what I love in him. And if you don't know football, you might not know this, but if you ever listen to a press conference of his, anytime the team wins and they say, man, you did a great job. There's been a couple of games this year that we won solely because of him, because he is just so good. They would go to him and say, hey, you did this, you broke this record, what do you think? And every time they win, he goes, well, the line did so well, and our wide receivers were just getting open, and it was just a team effort, and we won because of the team. Never takes any credit. The second they lose, he always goes, it's because I threw that interception, it's because I fumbled, it's because I made too many mistakes. That's what a good leader does. Good leader, when things are going well, they go, it's because everyone else's fault. Things aren't, they say, no, this is my responsibility. I'm the leader of this team. Godly leaders take responsibility. That's what we do. We do not deflect blame. When something goes wrong, whether it's our fault or not, godly leaders look at what they could have done to prevent that mistake and make it better. And when we make a mistake, we are humble enough to acknowledge it, to acknowledge the need to improve, the need to be better, the need not to be perfect. See, the most essential quality of a godly leader isn't perfection. You're not even going to be able to do that. It isn't perfection at all. It's credibility. That's what the most essential quality of a godly leader is, credibility. And you only earn a credibility by admitting your mistakes, taking responsibility, and improving. That's the only way you do it. Godly leaders take responsibility. And number 4, our last one. What else did Saul do as a broken leader? He prioritized status. David is anointed to be the next king. And the first major step in this destiny of David being the next king of Israel after Saul is his battle against Goliath. Probably know the story of David versus Goliath. Spoiler, David defeats Goliath, okay? Goliath is defeated, and the nation of Israel see this, and they start singing songs about David. And you can just feel how Saul probably feels. Here's some of the songs that he sang in chapter 18, verse 6. When the men were returning home after David had killed the Philistine, the women came out of all the towns of Israel to meet King Saul with singing and dancing, with joyful songs and with timbrels and lyres. As they danced, they sang, listen to the song they sang, in front of Saul. Saul is slaying his thousands, David is tens of thousands. It's like, man, Saul's going to be like, what in the world? Why? Like, oh, Saul, yeah, you got 1,000, that's good. But David, tens of thousands, look at David, yeah, David. And look how Saul responds to this, verse 8. Saul was very angry. This refrain displeased him greatly. They have credited David with tens of thousands, he thought, but me with only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom? And from that time on, Saul kept a close eye on David. See, instead of Saul celebrating the fact that David defeated Goliath, something that Saul did not think was possible, did not think anyone could do, that he couldn't do himself, this amazing win and battle that they had that David gave to the Israelites, instead of celebrating that, instead Saul became jealous. Why? His status was in jeopardy. All of a sudden, they aren't singing about Saul anymore. It's about David. When the goal of leadership is your status and your recognition, you're never going to be satisfied because you're never going to have enough of it. You will constantly be competing with any possible competitor, looking for applause and for credit wherever you can get it, and you will run over anyone that gets in your way. That's why godly leaders direct back to God. That's what godly leaders do. They direct back to God. Come up, Frank. When God's name and renown are the desire of our soul, we remain unfazed when either we or others get credit. Our confidence is rooted in the faith that the true measure of greatness is not in our earthly recognition as a leader, but instead it's our heavenly approval as servants of the King. Any influence, any authority, any leadership you have, it is all a gracious gift that God has given you from above. And when much is given, much is expected. Understand that any leadership you have is a privilege that God has given you, and you are called to be stewards of that. That is why we do not make it about us. But godly leaders say, no, it's about Him. That's why Philippians chapter 2, verse 3 through 4 says this: do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself, not looking to your own interest, but to each of you to the interest of the others. Saul is a great example of a broken leader, a leader who was called by God to lead Israel as king, who was called by God to do amazing things, but ultimately failed. He only followed his own commands. He didn't follow all of it. He only followed what he thought he should follow. He didn't like anyone who disagreed with him. He didn't take any responsibility when things went wrong. He passed the blame to other people. And once someone else started to get credit, he became furious and so enraged that he could not take his eyes off the fact that he was not going to be the king any longer. Everything was about making him king and bringing up his status. And when David comes around, he is blinded by that rage. You know what the common denominator is when it comes to everything that Saul did wrong? Saul was concerned about one person, himself. That's it. Everything was about Saul. That's why we need to make sure that we understand, as godly leaders, we are called to make it always about Him and not us. Do not allow your love for self to hurt the responsibility that God has given you. You have influence. That means you're a leader. That means you have responsibility. And if you are only worried about yourself with that responsibility, then you're going to hurt the people around you. You're going to hurt the task that God has given you. You're going to hurt the vision that God has given you, the vision that you are responsible for. You're going to hurt it. See, I truly understand how this happens to Saul. I get it. I can see how somebody becomes so concerned with their own status and their own priorities and their own thinking. Seen it happen. They lose sight of the God of the universe who gave them the responsibility and the calling in the first place. yesterday I was at, it's called Team Day. It is a big seminar that our denomination and our district puts on. And there's people that are speaking, and it's a good chance for me to kind of see some of the other pastors that I know, and then just kind of get to know people. And I get lunch with a lot of different pastors because to complain about you guys, just kidding, that's not what. But I get lunch just to kind of so we can like build off each other. And I asked a lot of them, hey, how are things going at church? Because we're after this pandemic, and a lot of things we talked about yesterday was like how we're never going back to what it used to be. You guys know that, right? Like we're never going back to that. Things are different now. So I was asking all these churches, like, hey, how are things going? And every single one of them said, it's all right. We have about 50 to 60% of what we used to have coming on a weekly basis. Tithes are about the same. Weird how like tithes kind of remain the same, but some people dropped off. That's a normal stat. And naturally, this is true. If you look at the Barna Group, they'll say that church attendance, most churches have decreased by anywhere from 40 to 60%, which is a lot. And I see that being true when I talk to pastors. Most of them say, yeah, that's happened. But what's weird here, and I'm not saying this, please hear my heart when I say this, I'm not saying this to be arrogant, I'm not saying this to brag, and I'm not even saying this to do a humble brag. For some reason, that is not true here. I don't think it's because we are so great. I don't think it's because I'm so great. Frank's great. I don't think it's because I'm so great. I truly believe that. Because I've heard stories of people that have been coming. We have more people coming today than we did pre-COVID. Not even close. And I've heard stories of how people found out about it, and we do the most we can to be the best church we possibly can. We feel like that is honoring to God. We do that. We want to make it, if you're looking for a church that's our style, that when you come here, that you feel loved and you feel like, oh yeah, they do it the way they're supposed to. But I don't think it's because we are so great that church has grown. I think it's fully and 100% because God has blessed it. That's what I think. I think healthy things grow, but here's what I know. When it's not because of us that we have certain results, whatever that is, if it's not because of us, that means when things are going really well, we can't get arrogant because we didn't do it. I don't know why. And when things are going really poorly, maybe less people are here, then it's not because we're so terrible. I heard a pastor tell me once, you're not as good as people say you are. You're also not as bad as people say you are, but you're definitely not as good as people say you are. And it's true. And I say this again, not to be arrogant at all, but here's what I truly believe. We need to do things a certain way so that at the end of the day, the organization of Impact Church is not what's blowing up, or myself or any leaders here or anybody else that's here. It's not about us, but solely about the mission that God has given us and the calling God has given us. And when things are going well and then we see new people coming and things are growing, then we celebrate God for the blessing that he has given us. And if things continue to grow, we continue to celebrate God for the blessing he's given us. And if things stay like this forever, then we continue to celebrate God for the blessing he has given us. And if we're only here for another 5 years and then we shut the doors, then we are thankful for the opportunity that we had to serve our community, and we hope that we did it in a way that people were impacted by him and not us, okay? That's what godly leaders do. They do not make it about us. It's about him. That's why Philippians 2, 3 through 4 says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, means humble yourself. In humility, value others above you. It's not about you. It's about other people. It's not about me. It's about others. Not looking to your own interest, but each of you to the interest of others. Can you imagine if we were a church that everyone that came in here, including me and staff and leaders and whoever you are, came in and said, hey, my favorite thing about this is it's about you. It's not even about me. Can you imagine what that would do to a world and community that needs it? That's what we're called to do, to prioritize God in what we do, to make it all about him so that when we live out the calling God has given us, we can just deflect it back to the person who deserves it. He's the one who does it. We're not that special. I'm not that special. It's all about him. Humble ourselves. Make it about him. It's not what Saul did, but godly leaders do that. Let's pray. Dear God, we thank you for being the God who gives us the direction and the example of how to live in this world and how to lead in this world. Thank you for being a God who gives us responsibility, who gives us a calling, who tells us to go and make disciples, who gives us the privilege to serve you. But dear God, I pray that we can learn from some of the examples in Scripture of broken leaders, people like Saul, so we can avoid some of the pitfalls and mistakes that they have made and ultimately make the way we lead our family, our friends, our community, our church, to make the way we lead all about your glory and not us. Less of us, more of you. It's what we are praying for. God, remind us that you are the one who deserves all the glory in anything that we do at home, at our work, here in this building, that you are the one who deserves our praise and our glory. Thank you for leading us, and thank you for showing us the example of humility that you sent us through Jesus. Thank you for saving us. Dear God, I pray as we continue closer to Christmas that you help us to lead in the way you call us to. In your Son's name, amen. Let's close today by singing this closing song.